cheap. I think that it's drilled into us from day one that new is better and old is bad. That, if your cell phone is 5 years old, you're a bit of a loser, frankly. And so using a technology that your great grandparents used is unthinkable. And using a technology that's been around for 8,000 years is beyond unthinkable. And if it's unthinkable, you just don't think about it. It doesn't compute.
For centuries, draft animals were the premier power source for agriculture. Although tractors eventually usurped draft animals on most farms, ranches, and forests, some teamsters have kept the traditions alive. With the upswing of modern homesteading and people striving for ecologically beneficial agricultural practices, it looks like draft power is making a comeback. In this episode of Voices from the Field, NCAT Sustainable Agriculture Specialist and wannabe teamster Linda Poole quizzes seasoned experts Tracy Mumma, who's also an NCAT staff member, Tracy's husband David Sturman, and Jim Gronau, an oxen teamster from Canada, on the what, why, and how of getting started with draft animals. If you want to learn more, be sure to come back for the next episode, which will be an in-depth conversation between Tracy and Jim about using draft animals in farming. Let's listen.
Hello, friends and listeners, and welcome to an ATTRA podcast on the fascinating topic of using draft animals in farming. I'm Linda Poole, a grazing specialist with the National Center for Appropriate Technology, and I'm so excited to be joined today by Tracy Mumma, her husband, David Sturman, and Jim Gronau from Ontario, Canada. Before we launch into our main conversation today, I would hope that each of the guests here would briefly introduce yourself. I'd like to start with Tracy. She's my treasured colleague here at NCAT and has been at this a lot longer than I have. So let's start with Tracy, please. Maybe you can tell us where you are, what your background or experience is with draft animals, and anything else you want us to know about yourself.
Sure, thanks, Linda. I have been working with the National Center for Appropriate Technology and its ATTRA Sustainable Agriculture program for the past 24 years. And I do, in addition to sustainable agriculture work, I do editing and communications work as well. And in my personal life, I live on a farm in Montana's Mission Valley in Northwest Montana with my husband, David, and our family. And we farm a small diversified livestock operation and use draft horses in our work as well.
I'm David Sturman, obviously, married to Tracy here. So my background is I was a farrier shoeing horses for about 20 years. And then I became a horse logger. Did that for about 20 years, kind of faded towards the end when we bought the farm. And yeah, we've been using draft horses on the farm, mostly for haying, very little bit about plowing, but that, well, I can elaborate that later, and we also are getting back into driving horses. Okay, Jim, take it away.
Okay, I'm Jim Gronau. My partner, Rosalind Adams, and I have a small sheep operation in southeastern Ontario, and we use a team of oxen. We're transitioning to ox power. We don't have all the equipment that we would need yet to use just oxen, so we still use a tractor for some stuff.
Yeah, well, I'm so excited, Jim, that you got in touch with me after a podcast in the She's Raising Sheep series where I talked with Mary Rose Livingston, who with her husband uses horses to farm in New York. And one of the best things about that was when you got in touch and you sent me some background information, and we will have that information provided to listeners in our show notes for this, so you can see some videos of Jim working with his oxen. But I just got so intrigued. I've heard David and Tracy a little bit talk about what they're doing, and I've been around horses all my life and cattle. but never in this way. And I have a little place that's only 100 ewes or so, and having a tractor just doesn't make sense. But what I hadn't understood is all the things that you can do with animal power. So I wonder if you, Jim, and David could talk about some of the different things that you've done, and maybe even some of the things that you've tried and it's like, nah, you really ought to do that with a tractor instead. So what can you tell us about that, Jim?
Well, like I say, we're kind of limited by equipment so far. So we have a good cultivator that we use, and that works very nicely. And we have a manure spreader, which works like a charm as well. And the only other thing we have right now is a stone boat that we made. But that's a very versatile kind of thing. You can haul just about anything anywhere with that. And from time to time, we use them for dragging logs, firewood, stuff like that. Anything heavy that we don't want to try and pull, and we'd rather not use the tractor for, that they can pull. They're hugely strong. Well, so are horses, eh? We'd like to do more, but it's in our part of the world, it's pretty hard to find equipment. That's the main problem. If there were, a large community of draft animal farmers around us, then it wouldn't be a problem, but there isn't. I guess in Ohio and Pennsylvania, places like that, New England, there's equipment all over the place, but not around here. I don't know, what's it like with you guys in that regard?
You find them in fence rows. Then
Yeah.
you better be creative on how to get it up and running. And we've had some success and some failures. Just one, for instance, we did haying with the horses for, I don't know, 5-6 years. But our John Deere number 4 mower, a friend he was going to use it as a lawn ornament. And I persuaded him to give it to us. So after some repairs, we used it for that length of time. It was great. Another time we got a harrow cart. That's you got the team up front, and then in front of you is, in our case, a spike tooth harrow, and then this cart goes behind. And lesson learned, that soil was fairly rocky, and that seed is so well sprung, it catapulted me out a few times. But the team was so well broke, not only to lines, but verbal command, I could whoa them as I was on the ground just by voice.
Wow.
So, yeah, I mean, it's got some challenges, but fortunately, things are a lot slower for the good than a tractor. So your wrecks tend to be less dangerous. Not always, but most of the time.
Yeah.
I think Jim hit on one of the major points of using draft animal power, which is the equipment can be hard to find. And there's getting to be less and less antique equipment all the time as we get further and further from the era where people use that. So that's not as much of an option anymore as it was. And there was a little bit of a resurgence in recent years of manufacturers making things specifically for farming with draft animals, and more new equipment became available for several years, but now that's starting to taper off again, where companies are making less draft animal equipment. Just the market is not very deep for that. And so that's one of the biggest challenges. If you're not able to fabricate equipment on your own, or if you don't have a source of antique equipment that's in running condition, that might be your biggest challenge in getting started with draft animals.
Wow, this is such valuable information, because, I keep wondering what is what infrastructure might be needed? What does it take to select these animals and take care of them? But I hadn't thought enough about the equipment that is involved. When I moved to this place, it's an old prairie homestead. It was homesteaded in 1914. And I don't think they had ever thrown away a piece of iron. It was all on the hill. And what did I do? I recycled it all, except for a dump rake.
Oh no, that pains me to hear that, but that's unfortunately a very common thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, darn. Yeah, so since it is gone and it sounds like that's a real limitation, how do you get past that? Do you like have a community that you go to, or how hard is it to find plans to make some of these things or adapt typical things we drag around behind a small tractor? What's
That can work. Something that was designed for a small tractor, but actually, Europe is kind of very innovative for small horsepower, literally equine horsepower implements. And another source, have you heard of the Small Farmers Journal?
I haven't, but tell me about it.
It comes out of Sisters, Oregon. It's angled towards basically horse or oxen power, and it's been out since 1976. And not only is the text good, but all the advertisements are oriented towards, small scale farming. Yeah, the classifieds are as good as the articles.
Yeah, well, that's how
Yeah.
newspapers work for me. Yeah, Jim, what do you do about that?
We're still looking. That's what we do. We just look online and ask everybody we know. And eventually, we'll probably get some stuff. There are some manufacturers still who make new stuff. I'm sure you guys know about I&J in
Oh yeah.
I
Oh
forget
yeah.
Ohio or Pennsylvania. So their stuff is really good. Their mowers are incredible. I talked to them. I said, well, what size of a bar would you recommend for a sickle bar mower for a team of oxen? Because oxen move slower than horses, so you typically have to have a really short bar, or else it'll jam up because they don't go fast enough to keep the blade cutting. And he said 7 feet. I thought he was going to say 3 or 4 feet. So that's how confident they are in their mower. They're very good. They're also not at all cheap. They're probably cheaper than equipment for tractors. The other thing you can do is, David, you were saying about stuff for small tractors. You can use a forecart, which is a little 2-wheeled cart that your team pulls, or you can use it with a single animal to pull it. And there's a little hitch kind of thing on the back of the forecart. You generally sit on the forecart yourself, but on the back of it there's a hitch, and you can attach a tractor drawn implement to the back of the forecart, and that way it's not a problem that you have the little short tongue like you have on a tractor implement. And also the weight of the tongue isn't on the animal's shoulders, it's on the forecart. So that can be handy. We haven't got that. It's hard to know. You have to kind of assess what your activities are that you hope to do, and see what the situation is in terms of different sources of different kinds of equipment. It's quite complicated, that aspect, I have to say. And I hope that some of the people who are going to hear this podcast are going to say, well, why don't I start manufacturing that stuff? I'm pretty handy. And it's not impossible. I mean, there's a horse farmer in Ontario here, Ken Lang, who he made his own no-till drill for his horses.
All right.
He bought a no-till drill and adapted it to work with horses. So it can be done. I'm not that handy myself, but I'm sure some people are out there,
Oh yeah, we've seen some lovely homemade equipment that just works like a charm, and also some really clunky homemade equipment that doesn't work at all. So there's the whole gamut.
Yeah.
Just a little humor, but with a serious tone to it. Watch out for heavy metal-itis. Yeah, like you say, Jim, think through and through. Do I really need this or not? Because I've seen, it's tractor people, but they've got all sorts of equipment, and they maybe use it once a year, maybe every 5 years. So don't get overwhelmed with steel.
Yeah, it's always a question of planning and the return on investment when we're trying to run an ag business, especially a small scale business with appropriate technology. Part of that is limiting your input. So I'm hearing that there are challenges in the equipment, and I hadn't even got there. I was thinking of the challenge of, well, should I do horses? Or I know people use donkeys and mules and the oxen thing, and then where would I even find the right type of animals, or could I raise them myself? So it sounds, David, like you and Tracy are horse people and Jim is an oxen person. So do you want to build the case for the equine power, horsepower?
Well, okay, sure. And by the way, I've seen photos of using goats for tillage work. So don't discount them either.
Okay. Well, if goats can do it, maybe sheep can, and I won't have to buy anything. Go
There
ahead.
you go. Have a 4-up hitch of sheep. Anyway, some words of advice is get an older broke team. Don't learn with the horses, because you're going to either get injured or you're going to burn out real quick. And there's many sites on the computer that you can find good broke teams. It may not be in your neighborhood. It might be clear across on the Atlantic Ocean in our perspective. But the first team, you want something calm. So you learn, and then maybe after a couple of years, you can advance to a little more advanced team. And that's how we started, with a very mellow team, and then we graduated up to a little hotter team, and yeah, it worked fine.
Sounds great. So have you ever tried mules or donkeys, and what breeds of horses, what size of horses are you using?
Oh, way back when, I did have a pretty chunky mule. This is back when I was logging, but pretty soon the ponderosa pine got way bigger than that, so I cashed him in and got one Belgian mare, and then I got another Belgian mare. And gosh, Tilly, my first Belgian, she weighed at the truck scale 1940 pounds. And then I wound up getting this other horse, Cody, and he was definitely over a ton. And yeah, they did fine. They did fine.
Seems
Again,
like
that's something where you want to look at what you're going to be doing and scale your power to your goals for your team, because there's no point in feeding giant Belgians if you're going to cultivate a tiny little bit of acreage to raise microgreens or something.
Yeah, the Shetland pony might be the ticket there.
So is there a place somebody could go, or do you just need to find a mentor to ask these questions? Because, with my little place, what I'm thinking about is I feed large round bales in the wintertime, and those bales are about 1,600 pounds and they're round. And I keep looking at them and thinking, how come I can't put a bar in that thing and just roll it down, and put it where I want, because I do bale grazing. And then it's like, I wonder if I could use draft animal power to clean my corrals,
Sure.
those types of things. And it's like, well, how would I decide how big an animal I need? And do I need one or two? Or how do you figure that stuff out when you're a rank beginner?
I think you probably ask somebody who knows. You ask somebody who's an expert on it, and explain your situation and what you need to do. I think that's all you could do. If you're talking about where to get advice and stuff, there's all kinds of social media. There's a couple of really good Facebook pages. Draft Animal Power Network has a Facebook page as well as a website. And for oxen, there's a thing called All Things Oxen. And I started a thing called Oxen in Canada, also a Facebook page. And I know social media has a reputation for being kind of mean and stuff, but the draft animal pages the people are extremely nice. So, all kinds of beginners put a kind of super basic question, and they get really clear answers, really exhaustive answers, really detailed answers. It's quite impressive. If it's horses, I think probably just about every state and province in Canada has a draft horse association. It shouldn't be too hard to find those. And horses, of course, are much more common than oxen. So I can't see that really being a big problem. I know there's people on Draft Animal Power Network from your part of the country.
Learn how to harvest the sun twice with practical information at NCAT's AgriSolar Clearinghouse. Get access to more than 400 peer-reviewed articles, the latest in agri-solar news, and connect with farmers and solar developers who are working together to make the most out of our shared resources. We'll see you at agrisolarclearinghouse.org.
Well, before we think about where I go, it's like, why should I be thinking about oxen instead of horses? I mean, that's from my point of view. If I could do it with either one, the cattle are a better fit on my place. I'm listening when David says, that oxen are slower and that's safer.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. And, it's just, we get a lot of winter, and I would need more, I think I would need more shelter I've had horses all my life, and I need more shelter typically for my horses than I do for cattle that are out here. And so, I'm leaning towards the idea of cattle, but I don't know anybody who has ever, I've never seen an oxen in real life. So why would people go with oxen instead of horses, Jim?
There's a bunch of reasons. They're easier to find. Not oxen, but calves are easier to find. Anywhere there's cattle farms, especially dairy farms, then there are bull calves to be had for a song, because dairy farmer just wants to get rid of the bull calves generally. So we bought ours for, I don't know, I can't remember, like maybe $300 for the pair of them. So it was considerably cheaper than a tractor, certainly, and cheaper than nearly every draft horse you could ever find. Oxen are also cheaper to feed. Because they're not as finicky. They don't need as much grain. And in fact, once they're full grown, you probably shouldn't give them grain. There's a great danger of them getting too fat and foundering and stuff like that. So the other thing about oxen is, well, they're not just slower, they're also calmer in general. So if you can speak from bitter experience here, if you're using an implement and you didn't really know what you were doing and attached it wrong to the yoke, and the tongue falls to the ground, but the chain that's pulling the implement is still attached. If you had a team of horses and that happened, this metal pole smashing to the hard ground right between their front feet, they might very well be inclined to take off at a run with you on the implement, which could be pretty serious. So we did this with our oxen, and they just stopped and stood there and chewed their cud. So, we're both alive to tell this story. So they're much more calm, and they're also less liable to get weird diseases and drop dead for no good reason. Horses are subject to all kinds of I guess you guys all have worked with horses, don't you? So you know about this. You give them water before they get thirsty, for example. There's nothing quite that counterintuitive with cattle. They're just cows, They're pretty simple. There are reasons that you might like horses better too, though. I don't know if horses can live alone, but cattle can't. You have to have at least two of them. So that might be a thing. If you have a little market garden and you just want one animal to cultivate your carrots or something, maybe a horse would be a better choice. Although you can get little tiny breeds of cattle and use them as oxen. What else?
Yeah, well, you just touched
Yeah.
on something that I wondered about. So will any breed of cattle work?
As far as I know, some of them are more popular than others for various reasons. I think on the East Coast of North America, the most popular one with the experts is the American milking Devon, but they're very smart. So they're not really recommended for beginners because they're very good at figuring out how to get out of work. So you have to really be confident and let them know who the boss is. But they also move very quickly compared to other cattle. So that's you can probably use a regular mower with them, whereas you can't with most oxen. In the South, there's some breeds of cattle that are better with the heat, piney woods and Corrientes. I wouldn't personally be tempted to get a Jersey team because the Jersey bulls apparently have a terrible reputation. They can be awfully mean, and even if they're castrated, I guess they might be a little difficult. Let's see, what else can I say? Reasons that you might want horses rather than oxen. Horses live longer. You're lucky if a bovine lasts 20 years. But I know some horses live longer than that, and donkeys and mules, I guess, live quite a lot longer than that. So that's a good point. Also, horses do better than oxen in the heat, and probably even the breeds of cattle that do relatively well, probably horses are better. And mules have a really good reputation for being able to stand the heat and work hard in the heat. There's other reasons you might want to get cattle, though. I don't know if this is true, but it's a hunch. Because they're ruminants, they might do more for your soil. I don't know. There's all these billions of microbes in their rumen, and so they might help the biology of your soil just by being on it. And I don't know if you'd want to do this with your horse, but there is kind of a tradition with oxen. When they reach the end of their days, you eat them. So you don't want to do that with your tractor for sure.
True story. I'm pretty sure those are not omega-3 fatty acids that come out of diesel in a tractor. Yeah. So I'm curious how you all got started with this. Did you teach yourself or apprentice with somebody who was there, or maybe go to a workshop, or how did you get started, and what would your advice be to people who want to get started nowadays? Maybe things have changed since you got going. Tracy and David?
Go for it.
I'll say that there are some good schools and some good training programs for both horses and oxen. They're not plentiful. You may have to travel quite a ways to get to one, but there are good schools, and that's a good way to get started. However, a week-long class is not going to prepare you for everything you need to know. So it's really helpful if you can find someone to mentor you, someone from your local draft animal association, maybe, or some old timer who grew up using horses, of which there are still a lot in our part of the country. Not as many as there were every year, fewer, but still there are people who grew up driving horses and know a lot about it. So I think that the mentoring is invaluable. We have learned so many things from people who drove horses in the past, and just have a little tip of wisdom that they drop out, and you pick it up and run with that. So that the value of that cannot be discounted. That's really an important thing. And if you find someone that you can work with and shadow and learn their techniques, that's also really valuable. To work alongside someone for a long extended period of time is the best way to learn, I think.
some magic that I've experienced when I was logging. People would stop and obviously take photos and reminisce. And I say, here, you grab the lines. Let's see how you do. And some of these old coots, man, puts me to shame. Wow. So it makes me realize I got a long ways to go yet, but it's cool. All of, they just have the touch.
Wow. I love that. Yeah. Jim, what do you think?
Well, when we got started with the oxen, we actually thought we were going to use horses at first. We just decided, we wanted to reduce our ecological footprint, and we thought, well, we could do that with traction. So I guess we'll get horses, and we started looking into horses, and it seemed a little daunting. We're not kids, Rosalind and I, and we don't have any background with draft animals, so it was kind of intimidating. We read some stories about runaways and things like that, where the team takes off and terrible things happen. So then we saw something about oxen, and at first we just thought it was kind of a cute kind of thing. It's kind of funny. Well, we could get oxen. Look at those big horns, isn't that funny? But we started to look into it, and it seemed actually like a really good idea and something that we could probably do ourselves. But I spent 5 days at Tillers International, and it was a very good thing to do that. It wasn't just that they're experts, which they sure are, but just seeing somebody, a little skinny person making these giant animals do what they tell them to do with, just a word or a gesture. It's, I guess maybe you could do it just through books or videos online or something, but I think seeing somebody do it is invaluable. And on the strength of that 5 days I spent at Tillers, I taught Rosalind how to do it, and the two of us are always on the Facebook groups asking questions and saying, well, we ran into this problem. How do we deal with that? And we always get help. So I think a mentor, if there were one around, would be great. But for oxen, good luck finding one. I think you'd have to go to somewhere like Tillers. There's a couple of other places maybe that teach people how to use oxen in North America, but lots more for horses.
If it helps at all, my background as far as horses, it was none. I was born and raised in suburban Washington, D.C., suburbanite. But for the last 40 years, I've been around horses figuring I got gray matter between the ears. I can figure this out, and I eat humble pie a lot and just ask people.
Yeah, you guys make me think of Nicole Masters' book, For the Love of Soil, and she talks about 5 limiting factors for success in building soil health. And I've been to a lot of her workshops, and she said, of these 5, what do you think is most important? And we always agree with what she says. And there's microbes and minerals and all these different things, but the most important one is mindset. Having the right mindset. Don't try this unless you have the right mindset of somebody who wants to learn and adapt and go forward. I think that I'm hearing you guys say the same thing. So I'm not surprised. I think Nicole is brilliant, and it's clear that you are too. And it's so heartening to think that maybe we can use good sense. I won't say common sense, because I don't think that good sense is common anymore, but that we could just use some good sense on how to get started with this. Because I'm so very new, I probably didn't even ask the important questions. And I wonder if the 3 of you would like to go around and just say, here's a question you should have asked, Linda, that a beginner might need to know this piece of information. So Jim, would you like to kick this one off?
Yeah, actually, I got a couple of them. The first one, actually, I think we were going to deal with this question, but we didn't really get into it, is why use animal power? And I kind of alluded to this. In our case, it was because we wanted to reduce our ecological footprint. And I just like to expand on that a little bit, which is short of using your own muscles, there is no other truly renewable, truly sustainable form of traction for a farm. Any kind of tractor, whether it's a diesel or electric or one of those little two-wheel jobs, it's all an industrial product. It's the end result of a worldwide network of devastation, ecological and social. With draft animals, you don't participate in that. Your fuel comes from a hay field, preferably your own, or if it's not, if you don't have enough land, it comes from the neighbor's hay field. Nobody is going to start World War III over your hay field, so your fuel is not going to contribute to that kind of thing. I guess that's enough on that topic. You guys go ahead.
No, that was I listeners are only going to have their ears, but I can see our speakers as we're doing this, and we're all nodding our heads. You just spoke a truth that all of us on this podcast believe in very strongly, Jim. So thanks for bringing that up.
There's some intangible things with well, I'm sure with the oxen too, Jim, but they start every time. You don't have to rely upon the tractor repair shop, especially during haying season. They're so slammed they can't take care of you. And I never received a slobbery kiss from a John Deere tractor like we have with the team. And horse sweat, in my case, that's the best perfume there ever was.
You're a poet. Yeah, that's another beautiful thing to think about. Yeah. Tracy, how about you?
Well, taking the long view of it, tractors really have never reproduced on their own either. And so if you're looking at the long haul, you can look at renewing your draft resource over time if it's an animal. And they really are pleasant to work with. The horses, I would say, are flexible in terms of if you're wanting to go for a ride at the end of the day, you can do that. And it's a great pleasure. I'll agree with David on that there's a lot of intangibles that make it really worthwhile.
Going back to your statement, David, about they'll always start. One of the reasons I finally sold or gave away all my horses is that I was only using them rarely, and they were standing around, and my horses were kind of high-powered horses who wanted to work. And I felt bad. I felt like I was wasting an animal. And I'm wondering with the draft animals, if there's someone like me who's thinking, I'm going to mostly be using these critters, in the winter moving hay. So maybe they'll probably get to work kind of regularly then. And then I'm going to clean my corrals, and who knows what other things I might come up with if I had a little draft team. But they're going to be standing around a lot. Do they, my horses, those high-powered horses, sometimes they just kind of get their own ideas when they stand around. Do they stay trained? Do they need regular workouts? Do you need to have a training program that you're on top of? Or once you've got a good relationship with them, you're in pretty good shape?
It depends upon the horse. Some horse you can pull out of the field every 2 to 3 months, and they're as fine as yesterday. And others, it could be a totally different story. But no matter the critter, if you're going to do some pretty heavy work, just like, you an athlete, you got to get in shape to do it. But it sets your mind at a totally different rhythm. Yeah, and it can be a challenge finding something to do with the team. Field work is seasonal, so you might have a lot of downtime. If you're farming during the summer, maybe you can do sleigh rides or logging in the winter. any excuse to use the team. And right now we got our buggy wheels at a repair shop to take the steel off the tires, well, change the tires from steel to rubber so we can just go noodling around the neighborhood. And I guess you can noodle around with your John Deere tractor too, but it's just not the same.
So we're getting right to the end of our podcast, and I always like to ask for top tips for beginners. If you only had one or two things you could tell a beginner on the topic of draft animals, what would you say? And Tracy, could we start with you?
Sure. I would say don't go beyond your comfort zone. This is not the place to push yourself to try something you've never tried and aren't sure will work. This is the time to be cautious and use things that you can do and build on those skills gradually, but don't jump in both feet first and go off without preparation.
I already touched upon a heavy metalitis. Yeah, go slow and get a well-seasoned horse or a team. Don't get something hot or something that you'll grow with that team. Get something old and experienced. It may be more expensive down the long haul, but in the short haul, you're way ahead of the game.
And what do you have to offer as advice?
Actually, I want to just follow up on something that David just said before I make my final kind of thing, which is I'm sure that's true about horses, that you would be well advised to get an experienced team. I would say with cattle, it's the opposite. I would get a little pair of calves, as young as you can get them. And as long as they've had their colostrum and they're big enough to travel without getting sick, take them home and bottle feed them. They'll think you're their mom, and they'll be attached to you always. And that way you can learn together. They might not be the best team you ever have because you're learning too as they're learning, but I think it's a safe way to get into draft animal power is with a pair of calves. But I wanted to finish with something really kind of different, if that's okay. Well, if it's not, you can edit it out. But I wanted to relate a story about a horse farmer here in Ontario, Tony McQuail. He's been farming with horses for decades. And back in, I can't remember, the 90s or the 70s or when it was, he was invited to speak at some alternative energy conference. And everybody there was all excited about, hydrogen and photovoltaic, this and that. He was very clever, I thought, the way he did his talk. He said that on his farm, his traction was provided by modular power units. And if he just had a light job to do, he used one module. And if he needed a bit more power, he could use two. And if he had a really big job, he could use up to 6 of these power units together to do the job. He said, he was able to use these units to produce the fuel they needed right on his own farm, and they didn't create any emissions. And their only byproduct was organic fertilizer, and so on and so on. And he just kept explaining all the incredible advantages of draft animals without ever saying draft animals. And finally, the moderator or whatever of the conference said, "Wait a minute, you're talking about your draft horses, aren't you?" And Tony said, "Yes, I am." And everybody laughed and went back to talking about photovoltaic cells and hydrogen. And I think that this is a really important kind of story, because why did they laugh? They had all had their jaws on the ground listening to this incredible new technology that Tony had found. And when they found out it was horses, they laughed. I think they were embarrassed. I think that it's drilled into us from day one that new is better and old is bad. That, if your cell phone is 5 years old, you're a bit of a loser, frankly. And so using a technology that your great grandparents used is unthinkable. And using a technology that's been around for 8,000 years is beyond unthinkable. And if it's unthinkable, you just don't think about it. It doesn't compute. Because that's, this deep set psychological mindset. So there you go. There's that word mindset again. I think when we're talking to people about using draft animals, we have to bear this in mind, that we all have this prejudice against anything that's old. It seems like it's, you're a Luddite, you're against progress or something. But I mean, the progress that we've got in terms of traction is about to push us off a cliff. So that's all. Thank you.
Well,
That's a lovely conclusion. Thank you, Jim.
yeah, I agree too. That was exactly the summation that we at the National Center of Appropriate Technology will vote for. There is no more appropriate technology than what you just described, Jim. That modular technology that is self-replacing and fertilizes instead of pollutes, and it's a beautiful thing to think about. I want to thank our guests today, David Sturman, Tracy Mumma, and Jim Gronau, for this incredible conversation about draft animals. I don't know about you as listeners, but to me, all it does is make me come up with 10 more questions for everyone that we had answered. So I'm hoping that, listeners, if you have interest in this too, drop us a line at NCAT, attra.ncat.org, and we will follow up with these folks, because man, what a beautiful way to think about farming that is sustainable and good for the future and for our land. So again, I want to thank you all for your time, and I hope we're going to be doing this again real soon.
That's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. Additional information about this episode and related resources can be found at attra.ncat.org. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe to Voices from the Field wherever you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Rich Myers. ATTRA, Voices from the Field, is produced by the National Center for Appropriate Technology, headquartered in Butte, Montana. It's supported by the USDA Rural Business Cooperative Service as part of NCAT's ATTRA Sustainable Agriculture program. Any opinions, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this recording are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of the USDA or NCAT. We'll catch you again next week, and until then, keep on farming.